Good Friday morning, everyone. And it really is a Good Friday in multiple aspects of the word. So maybe I should say Happy Good Friday leading into the Easter weekend. And welcome to the Backyard Naturalist Season 2, Episode 17, Chipmunks. I don't know about you, but I've been paying much more attention to the clouds since last week. And right now, it's the polar opposite of last week, at least here in Milwaukee. I can't see a single cloud in the sky from my window, which likely means high pressure, as opposed to last week at this time when we had a blanket of stratus clouds. Quick note, the Backyard Naturalist is part of the UEC in my backyard. An extra special thanks to those of you who have purchased subscriptions that allows us to keep these weekly programs going and accessible. And a thank you to members of the UEC. That's the best way to support the organization, is by becoming a member. And I'm excited to announce that this month our friends over at Hacienda North Avenue are offering $6 off their beer sample flight and a buy one, get one deal on orders for UEC members. To redeem the discount, let the beer tender know you are a UEC member. And if you give them your contact info or a business card, you'll be entered in a drawing at the end of the month for a free membership to the Hacienda 100 Club, which gives you great year-round deals and swag. This offer is good for the entire month of April. And it is April right now, which means we are solidly into spring. I mentioned in an earlier episode that I love the transition into spring, probably more than spring itself, and those signs just keep coming. Our familiar blackbirds are singing at the tops of their lungs, and now the females have joined them in their cattail patches. You've probably seen them around as well. The Brewers hosted the Twins for opening day yesterday, my favorite holiday, and the good guys won in dramatic fashion. And closest to my home in my front yard, my pasque-flower and hepatica are super close to being in flower. Maybe the pasque-flower, which is on the left and which derives its name from the Hebrew Passover, will actually bloom on the last day of Passover, which is tomorrow. A friend of mine mentioned how much this flower looks like another famous flower, which I guess is just added security, really. But another sure sign of spring that we look for is the emergence of today's featured animal, the chipmunk, and specifically here in the eastern half of the country, the eastern chipmunk. Now we're really getting into semantics here when we talk about this, but a chipmunk is technically a type of squirrel. And one of the very first episodes, almost a year ago from season 1, 50 Shades of Gray Squirrel, that gets into a little bit more about what makes a squirrel, so you can revisit that as a refresher. But they are mammals, and squirrels and chipmunks are in the same family of rodent mammals, the Sciuridae. And the chipmunks are in a subgroup of squirrels, or a tribe, called the Marmotini, which sounds more like a high-end cocktail drink, and maybe is the coolest name I've ever heard of for a group of animals. The Marmotini are technically ground squirrels, meaning they primarily live on the ground as opposed to the many squirrels that live in the trees. The ground squirrels that are larger in size are usually what we call marmots, as we see here, which includes the dogs of the prairie and the ones that apparently can forecast weather, which are called groundhogs or woodchucks or whistlepigs or marmots. Whatever you call them, they're all marmots as a group. And probably as a result of living on the ground, they tend to be more social, and they tend to stand on their back feet to get a view of their surroundings, and often have specialized warning cries for predators, which may have also been the case for human ancestors that also may have left the trees for the open grasslands and prairies, and also tend to be social and stand on our two back feet. The members of the Marmotini that are smaller in size are the ones we tend to call ground squirrels, like the 13-line ground squirrel we may be familiar with. And they behave similarly to their larger marmot cousins. But one group of ground squirrels that we tend to call chipmunks return to the trees like their tree squirrel ancestors, and likely as a result behave a little more like the other squirrels, just with slightly smaller and less bushier tails. Most chipmunks are in the genus Neotamius, and of the 23 species in this genus, only one, the Siberian chipmunk, is found outside of Western North America. All 22 of the other species, like the Colorado chipmunk, the red-tailed chipmunk, the Sonoma chipmunk, lodgepole, Durango, they're all in the western part of North America. So just like the pattern you see with hummingbirds. If you live west of the Rockies, you get a lot of different chipmunks to choose from, a lot of different hummingbird species to choose from. But if you live east of the Rockies, it's pretty much the ruby-throated hummingbird and the eastern chipmunk. And they probably like it that way. And unlike ground squirrels, chipmunks usually have stripes that extend onto the face. And there's evidence that the stripes in general on ground squirrels and chipmunks serve a similar purpose to the spots of a jaguar. They allow the chipmunk to blend into their surroundings a little better and kind of break up their profile. So it's a type of camouflage from the many things that want to eat them. The eastern chipmunk is not only is it the only chipmunk out east, but it's the only surviving member of the genus Tamias. And its scientific name is Tamias striatus. Tamias comes from Greek, meaning treasurer, steward, or housekeeper, which likely references their roles in collecting and storing food for the winter. And striatus references the stripes in the plumage. No, you don't call mammal, those are for birds, plumage. Stripes in the fur, I guess. In any case, the word chipmunk, which I think is much cooler, comes from Ojibwe. The word ajidamu, which translates as one who descends trees headlong. And again, when you look at the distribution of the eastern chipmunk, you can pretty much see why it's called the eastern chipmunk. They're pretty small, only about 7 inches if you measure from the tip of the nose to the tip of their outstretched tail, but really only about 3 or 4 inches of that is actual chipmunk. The rest is tail. And they only weigh a few ounces, or about the same as an apple, a small apple. Excuse me. They have 4 toes on the front paws and 5 on the back. And for whatever reason, they have 2 fewer teeth than all those chipmunks out west. And naturally, they live in deciduous forests and areas with brushy scrub. But in the cities, our backyards and parks, that all serves them just fine. Male chipmunks are called bucks. Female chipmunks are called does. Baby chipmunks are called adorable. And they're also called kits, kittens, or pups. And then finally, a group of chipmunks is called a scurry, although this would actually be a rare sight in the wild, at least because they are quite solitary. They are excellent climbers, and in trees, they're often looking for food, like these service berries. But their burrows are underground, usually underground. So if you see a hole about this size somewhere on the ground, it very well could be a chipmunk burrow entrance. And when I've seen these in the past, I just saw one in Washington Park on Wednesday. I don't think I really gave much thought as to what was down there, other than my childhood thinking of what would happen if I stuck my hand down there. But sometimes my imagination gets ahead of me, and what lies beyond that entrance is something like this. So the burrow system usually has several chambers, several connected chambers, several entrances. Often the entrances are hidden in rock piles or shrubs. Sometimes after building the chamber, they'll plug some of those chambers up for security once everything is complete. When they dig the burrows, they have these extensive cheek pouches we'll mention soon, and they'll fill that with dirt. So the big puffy cheeks, and then they'll carry the soil to a totally different location and empty it there to keep the evidence of a burrow away from predators. So these burrows are also where they'll keep the stores of food that you often see them gathering, particularly as fall is approaching. So they'll have little storerooms in there. And then they also build little tunnels for waste. And that's both for food waste and body waste. So little chipmunk bathrooms down there. They don't have to emerge when it's cold to go to the bathroom. Unlike other ground squirrels, as I mentioned, chipmunks are solitary except during the mating season. And they will defend these burrows and the surrounding territories, particularly if there's good food around, from other chipmunks. There are generally 2 breeding seasons. One is just wrapping up here, ends at about April, starts in around February, when we start to see them emerging, usually March, April. And then the second one will begin in a couple months from June to August. Also, chipmunks will have several distinct burrow systems separated from each other. And most of them are much more simple. They're like their summer cottages up north that you'd go to. Those can be in trees, still usually underground, but they're used mainly for napping. And again, they're kind of separate from their big, I guess, regular home, their winter burrowing complex that they use when they hibernate. Overall, a typical wintering burrow can have up to 30 feet of tunnels inside it. So think about that when you look inside one of those holes next time. Unlike most mammals, which are either crepuscular, meaning they're most active at dawn and dusk, or nocturnal, meaning they're most active at night, chipmunks are diurnal, which is fairly uncommon in mammals. But even during their active summer months, they still sleep about 15 hours a day, which is one of the reasons I'm slightly envious of them. When they're not sleeping, they're usually foraging, and the menu items are vast and pretty staggering. So it ranges from plant bulbs to seeds to fruits to nuts to berries to green vegetation to mushrooms on the vegetable side. And then on the meat side, they'll eat insects, even frogs and worms and lizards, sometimes even baby birds and bird eggs, which often conveniently gets left out of the Disney cartoon stories. In fact, some ground nesting birds like veeries and ovenbirds will actively avoid areas if they hear chipmunks, and chipmunks are quite vocal. They fill their incredibly expandable cheek pouches with food, and then they can bring it back to their burrows to be stored. So it's less time out being vulnerable, fewer trips back and forth. And when I say cheek pouch, it's not really a cheek. So like if we stick food in our cheeks, kind of, outside our teeth, that space, if you're puffing your mouth up with air or trying to stuff it full of marshmallows, that's not what chipmunks are doing. Their cheek pouches are actual flaps of skin between their jaws and their cheeks that essentially run all the way from their ears down to their shoulders. So really big, and they can expand their cheek pouches to 3 times the size of their head. And as they're moving resources around to their burrows, they're also helping to disperse seeds that they end up not eating. And they're really important in helping to disperse particularly mycorrhizal fungi around in the forest that we've talked about in several episodes. Some truffles are completely reliant on mammals to be dispersed. They've lost any other way of dispersing. And chipmunks can be really important for truffles. So not only is that chief stucking super adorable, it's helpful for the ecosystem. And in a single day, a chipmunk can grab 160 or more acorns. And cheek stuffing then will be the topic of our first short little video. And here we go. You may need to adjust your volume a little bit, but we'll give it a play.
Ouch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9, 10, 10. Oh, 9. Slovenia?
Sorry, I don't usually do this, but I need to watch that one again. So bear with me. Let's watch it one more time.
Ouch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9, 10, 10. Oh, 9. Slovenia?
All right, so that was our first look at this game of Tetris that they play to see how adept they are at efficiently stuffing their cheek pouches.
Hey,
On the
Tim,
flip side, oh yeah,
we have a couple questions.
sure.
One of them is, were they eating them while they were stuffing their cheeks in that video? So that's the first question.
I don't believe they are. They're just like chickadees at a bird feeder. They usually don't eat them at the feeder. They'll take them somewhere that's a little bit safer to eat them. So as far as I know, they're just moving them from a place where there's a little more risk to a place where they can eat in security, or bring them for their winter stores, which they'll start doing a little bit more as the fall approaches.
Sure.
And the second question?
And the other question is, do chipmunks share a burrow, or because you said they're solitary, is it just one chipmunk per burrow?
It's one chipmunk per burrow unless they're raising young. So the only times that they're not solitary, as far as I know, is when they're mating, or when they're raising a family. And families, there's a good motherly, I guess, aspect to the chipmunks, but it doesn't last long. A couple weeks after they're kind of ready, mom kicks them out and they're done. So I'm sure there's a lot of different reasons why they picked that strategy, or not they picked that strategy, why that strategy is around. But likely because chipmunks are eaten so much. And then another strategy is that it just kind of allows for, if you're producing more babies, maybe the parental care will reduce the survivorship of individuals, but as a group, they'll expand. So. All right. So yeah, they eat a lot of different kinds of foods, but there's also a lot of things that likes to eat them, and maybe only second to the cottontail rabbit, which may be the number one food source in our backyards, in our neighborhood parks. Chipmunks are probably a close second. I've regularly seen Cooper's hawks on UEC bird walks with chipmunks in their talons, but they also fall prey to owls, weasels, snakes, foxes. A little farther up north, coyotes, bobcats, lynx, even raccoons. So even though they can live up to about 8 years in captivity, the average lifespan in the wild is only 2 to 3 years. During the winter, chipmunks technically are not true hibernators, because they do regularly wake up in their burrow to eat part of their winter stores. So it's more like long naps, but I do catch myself saying that they do hibernate technically, because they're really entering these long periods of torpor, TOR, between feeding. So it's these mini hibernations, these longer naps. And so during the torpor, their body temperatures drop from about 94 degrees to 40 degrees, so more than half. And their metabolic activity slows way down, so that in torpor, their resting heart rate is 4 beats per minute, which an active squirrel has 350 beats per minute. So really slows everything way down, and it gets them through that cold winter month. So it's very much like hibernation. And for all intents and purposes, I think it's okay to say that they hibernate, because really once they enter their burrows in late fall, we don't see them again until spring. Very rarely one will come out of its burrow, but it's extremely uncommon. In fact, along with the red-winged blackbird, there is a fierce competition among UEC staff and volunteers to be the first person to see a chipmunk in the spring on a UEC green space. And I know Glenna this year won the red-winged blackbird competition and almost won the chipmunk competition, because the chipmunk she found was just about something like 30 feet away from UEC property. So she didn't get the glory there. But they only go into this torpor with cold temperatures. And some researchers are speculating that if temperatures globally continue to rise, chipmunks may kind of disrupt their torpor, which actually is bad for their survival. And of course, that would throw off the whole UEC competition. Even more so than squirrels, chipmunks are fairly vocal. So we'll watch our second short video from National Geographic that breaks down some of the various calls and what they're doing and what they're for. So it starts off with kind of a chip trill that's emitted while the chipmunk is running and it has to do with territory defense. And if you listen closely, for those of you that listen to birds, to me, it sounds an awful lot like the vocalizations of chimney swifts. And again, they're doing this while they're running. Then there's an alarm call that's the chucking, which is done while standing up in one spot. And it still primarily indicates that there's a predator in the air. And not so much in this video, but to me, this call sounds very much like a cuckoo. And it's fooled me many times in the past. So now I know that if I hear a cuckoo and it's calling from up in a tree, it might actually be a cuckoo. But if I hear that cuckoo calling from the ground, then it's likely a chipmunk. And then there's a third kind of chipping alarm call that's done in response to a terrestrial predator. And it's one of the reasons why they're called a chipmunk. So let's listen and watch this video. All right.
You are making Kim's dogs go crazy with those noises.
Nice.
And then Jessica had a question about, are they below frozen ground when they are in their burrows?
That's a really good question. I would imagine they often are. But like with any other animal, they are in their burrow, their chamber is somewhat capturing their body heat, even though their body temperature goes way down. So they don't have to worry so much about staying at 90 degrees. They need to stay just above freezing so that their bodies don't actually freeze. And their burrows are lined with a lot of things to kind of capture their body heat. So I would imagine that often they're below freezing, but even if the surrounding area were to freeze, I think they'd be okay with the capturing their body heat. That's there's often a main burrow entrance, and then some of them are more like just a quick, I got to get in there one, but then they want to kind of minimize the number of ways that things could enter, and but also keep them hidden. So that's our eastern chipmunk, and I think I probably haven't paid that much attention to them, other than when I'm in that fierce battle to be the first to see them at work. And I kind of think chipmunks like it that way. They're a good neighbor. They don't bother you usually, but they're not one that expects you to be chatty over the fence. They just kind of want to be left alone. And they're the only chipmunk in town in the East. They're the only chipmunk in their genus. And again, I think they like it that way. But it's wonderful that they give us a glimpse into their world and provide us with that glimpse, as can be seen by these stress relieving photos that Jenny took outside her window in Massachusetts a couple of years ago. So thank you for joining me today, and we'll see you next week.